In today's video, we're going to be going over Overland Travel, ironically over Overland Travel, and we're also going to go over random encounters. In addition, random set piece encounters for new Dungeon Masters of 5th edition D&D. In order to accomplish this, we are going to utilize the Triboar Trail and the Wyvern Tour from the Lost Mine of Phandelver for all you Dungeon Masters who've been following along with our DM's guide for the Lost Mine of Phandelver. Let's get into it. When we talk about Overland Travel, there are many ways we can run this for our players. Regardless of the method you use, you as the Dungeon Master should be putting in some kind of effort as far as describing the events of the traveling day. Whether or not the players run into an abandoned caravan, or if it rains, or if they walk past a brook or a river, it is an opportunity for you as the Dungeon Master to increase player immersion. Describe the heavy rushing winds that sting the player's face as brush and debris hits them, stopping around midday to kind of rest and relax. When the winds finally die down, you're able to continue on your path into the evening until you need to set up camp in some underbrush that you find along the way to the Neverwinter Wood. When we examine the Triboar Trail, it is a trail that covers a stretch of land that covers the foothills and sparsely wooded plains that extend between the Sword Mountains to the south as well as the Neverwinter Wood to the north. The trail gets its name as it runs from the town of Triboar to the east and winds its way eventually through the ruins of Conyberry before finally trekking just north of Phandelver, eventually connecting to the high road. When traveling along the Triboar Trail, or any overland area for that matter, we need to be able to measure progress as the Dungeon Master so that way we know when our players are getting close to their destination. With that said, generally most game systems, and this one is no exception, utilize some sort of overland map in order to be able to allow the Dungeon Master or the Game Master to track progress over time. This map can be shared with the players or it can be kept by the Dungeon Master themselves, but generally speaking, this map is going to be utilized in order for the Dungeon Master to make approximations of distance. This distance can then be utilized to calculate the number of days traveled until the players make it to their expected destination. When utilizing the Sword Coast map provided in the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure, we can see that there are hexes that are used in order to measure 5 miles of distance. If we assume that the players travel 24 miles over the course of an adventuring day, we can then figure out how long it's going to take to travel from place to place. This method presented in the Lost Mine of Phandelver is very detailed, and a lot of Dungeon Masters won't even utilize miles, rather instead going by just days travel and letting the players know how long that's going to take. Regardless, most methods are like the ones presented here. However, this is where the commonalities between most systems end. While our adventurers are traveling, they are going to encounter many different monsters and challenges while they're traveling through the wilderness. These are oftentimes called random encounters that occur randomly dependent on the dice that you roll by the Dungeon Master. There are many methods of determining whether or not a random encounter happens. The method presented in the Lost Mine of Phandelver calls for a d20 roll during the day and at night. When a roll between 17 and 20 is rolled, a random encounter occurs with a table of possible results listed. The way we pick these monsters is by rolling on the random encounter table. In our case, utilizing a d12 presented in the adventure to determine what monster, and then on top of that we are then going to roll the dice required in our table in order to determine the numbers of those monsters that happen. That is the bare bones typical way that the adventure and the 5th edition system assumes that you will be utilizing when running your game. This can be cumbersome though at the gaming table, and it's going to be a real lull in your session if you have to roll all these dice all at the table. So might I suggest a simpler method in order to determine what happens at the encounter. Rather than relying on a d20 roll to determine when an encounter happens, you can just use your agency as a Dungeon Master to determine when and how a random encounter occurs. If there seems to be a lull in the session of travel, throw in an encounter. If the players seem bored, throw in an encounter. If you haven't had an encounter over the course of your session, throw in an encounter. Now, I'm not saying to overwhelm your players with combat encounters. That can go backwards very quick. You as the Dungeon Master have the ability to manage the pace of the session, and as a result, you can utilize these combat encounters to keep pace with the session and also enhance player engagement. On top of this, why are we going to roll these d12s while we're at the table? Why not just choose the monsters that feel right at the time? Maybe it's dark and you want your players to squirm as two ghouls creep their way through the forest in the darkness to come out and attack them. Maybe you want the encounter to just be super memorable and throw an owlbear at them because it's one of the most popular monsters and the one that's actually a fan favorite of many Dungeons & Dragons enthusiasts. On top of that, why are we rolling the dice formula to determine how many monsters actually occur in this random encounter? Why don't we just predetermine that by rolling before the session? And this is the strategy that I utilize more often than not. If you look at my table, you can see that I've already pre-rolled a number of monsters, as well as utilizing day and night to impact which monsters show up at what time. When you feel the need for an encounter to happen, just pick the one that feels right to you and roll with it. Now, with all that said, you can run these encounters in Theater of the Mind, which can be very hard for new DMs, or you can utilize a blank battle map, or you can do what I like to do, and I like to create a battle map based on the region that they're in and utilize that for all my random encounters. But with all that said, what if you want to plan a really cool planned overland encounter? For this, let's talk about the Wyvern Tour. It's a really great quest, location, adventure, whatever you want to call it, from the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and it does a really good job at accomplishing our goals. Wyvern Tor is a fairly well-known landmark in the Sword Mountains of the Sword Coast. This tour was actually previously the home to a bunch of wyverns, or wyverns, whatever you want to call it. Let me know in the comments below which way you're supposed to say it. But these wyverns were actually slain by adventurers a few years ago. With that said, a number of orcs from the Many Arrows tribe are currently occupying the tour. Mayor Harbin Wester of Phandelver actually will enlist the PCs in order to be able to take care of them, as they've been harassing a number of travelers along the Triboar Trail. We have all the aspects we need for a really awesome encounter. We have stakes based on the quest that has been given to our player characters, as well as the amazing location called the Wyvern Tour. But the adventure doesn't actually give you a map or imagery of the tour or the orc camp itself. What are we as Dungeon Masters supposed to do? For this, I actually recommend creating a map for this particular set piece yourself. You can do this with other set piece encounters as well that your players run into, whether unknowingly or via quest like we have in our scenario. There are plenty of map making softwares and services out there. In addition, you can also find many a cave map or den that will suit your needs for the encounter with a quick Google search. If you're gonna go the pre-made route, I would go with 2 Minute Tabletop. They didn't sponsor this video, though I wish they would. But with that said, they do have some really awesome assets and pre-made maps that you can utilize in your adventures. Many of their assets also can be imported into some map making softwares like Dungeon Draft, my personal favorite map maker for battle maps at the current time. Again, they didn't sponsor the video, but I just really love the product. The alternative is, again, Theater of the Mind, but I like to make these random-ish planned encounters a little bit more memorable with an awesome map. Let's go back to our encounter. In the camp, there is actually an orc scout that is doing patrols, alerting the rest of the orcs of any danger. Should the PCs be able to avoid or circumvent this particular orc, they will be able to enter the cave of the tour. Inside the cave, the players will find 6 regular mundane orcs, as well as Brugor X-Biter, a orc with 30 hit points, as well as a really gross, disgusting ogre named Gog. Gog the ogre will fight until the death. However, the rest of the orcs will flee if the X-Biter is slain. The reward for such a crazy encounter? Plenty of gold and perfume, of all things, and more XP for the players. Now you can see how uneventful the battle might be, and the encounter could just turn into a slog and a slugfest, given the fact that it's going to be very hard for you and the players to continue to kind of imagine and visualize what the layout of this battle is going to look like. With that said, having these named enemies and the dynamics of the cave and the tour, as well as the stealth mechanics before, really makes this mini quest, which could also be utilized as a set piece random encounter, very memorable. Give it a shot in your game. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to wrap up our discussion about both Overland Travel, set random encounters, as well as set piece random encounters as they relate to the Lost Mine of Phandelver. For those of you who have made it to the end, it would be a really huge, awesome benefit to me and to the community as a whole if you would smash that like button and also subscribe to the channel so that way you're alerted when other campaign guides, top 10 lists, or live streams come out for the channel. Be sure to join our community on Patreon, where Dave Platinum Dice, Sleepy Sorceress, Ceepus, and Wolf XZ have done, and enjoy many of those awesome tiers, which include merch, monthly games, and more. Links for that is down in the description below at patreon.com/bluecollardm, and also be sure to check out our website that is live at bluecollardm.com. Thank you for watching. I hope you all learned something, and until next time, happy gaming.